This video is made possible by the following mad lads. All their awesome gear they supply to me can be checked out in the description below. Hey guys, I spun a fair few times during the race at Buckmore Boy here, and welcome back to another video. As I'm sure you've worked out now from the title of this video, today I'm going to be talking about my experiences driving in my first ever motorsport race, the Buckmore 24 Hours. And the reason why I place such emphasis on the first ever is because whilst I think that I'm I say fairly accomplished sim racer, accomplished is probably the wrong word, I know my way around a pretend race car and around a pretend circuit, but not so much in real life. My real life driving experience is incredibly limited. In fact, only in the last year or so have I had the chance to actually drive something that is designed to go racing. Otherwise, all my driving has been on just on roads, normal public roads, which I have never ever gone fast on because I'm a good boy. So whilst I knew it would be challenging to try and get used to a new circuit and get used to actually driving in a kart with G-forces and bruising capabilities, whilst I knew that was going to be difficult, I didn't really appreciate just how difficult it was going to be. Our WTF1 team consisted of 8 drivers. We had the pro drivers, as I like to call them, the guys who actually know what they're doing, which consisted of course, Super GT, James Baldwin, we had TRL Limitless in there, and Sonic, who is an esports driver, or was an esports driver I think, for Alfa Romeo. And then we had the plebs, which consisted of myself, Tom Bellingham of WTF1, Ben Daly, otherwise known as Tia Metmaduk, or Marmaduke if you're me and can't say his name, and Alex Gillen. Now prior to the race I was hoping to get out and practice the circuit and practice the kart, especially given that about an hour before the race began it started to rain, so the track was just completely soaked, and these karts, they run on slick tyres. In the end, however, I only had 5 minutes of practice, and I spent most of that 5 minutes pointing the wrong way as I was trying to understand just how the hell you would drive something with slicks on a wet surface whilst trying to figure out the wet line, again with zero experience of driving in the wet.
In that well then?
Well, I mean, my strategy was to just spin a lot, and that was going to warm the tyres up and get embedded in. I think it's working out pretty well.
And I got to say that after practice I felt pretty down in the dumps. I felt pretty upset with my driving. I know I only had 5 minutes out there, of course, but I kind of expected to have some sort of competency when driving around, but I felt that I was wholly lacking it after the practice session. Luckily, even though I was all doom and gloom, I had Super GT there, and I think James Baldwin gave me a bit of a pick-me-up as well. They just kind of said to me, you know, it is literally your first time out there, don't worry about it too much, just try and focus when you get into the car a bit later on. So with that 5 minutes of pretty awful practice under my belt, the race started. We started off with James Baldwin in the car, who did a great job, did the first 2 hours of driving, and whilst he slipped down the order at the start a bit, it was a bit of a free-for-all at the start, he managed to clutch his way back up the field and ended the stint in 4th position. We then switched over to Tom, of course, one of our novice drivers, so to speak, and predictably fell down the field a bit, but we were expecting that, so we weren't too upset at all, and Tom, like myself, was having a little bit of trouble adapting to the wet conditions, but put in a solid stint nonetheless. Then, as the clock ticked down to 21 hours remaining, it was my turn for an hour in the car. I gotta say, I was pretty damn nervous. It's a very intimidating thing going onto a circuit with 28 other karts, with the majority of the people driving being far more proficient than you are. It would be very easy to run away from that, but if I ever want to do anything like this properly, I need to get over that quickly. So I just put that to the back of my mind, got into the kart, and out I went. The first thing that hit me when driving onto the circuit wasn't another kart, though that would happen a bit later on, was the visibility, or rather the lack of it. It was still raining very slightly at the start of my stint, and of course there was a lot of spray on the circuit being kicked up, and it was incredibly difficult to see out of the visor. I had to actually have it open a crack just to be able to get some air into it, otherwise it steams up and you just literally can see nothing. As I predicted, the first few laps out on the circuit were pretty slow. I was having a really rough time adapting to the different conditions from practice. It was a bit drier than practice, but still there was a lot of wet surface out there, and if you of course put a slick tyre onto a wet surface it pretty much becomes useless. Of course, a big downside to being one of the slowest karts on the track for a short period of time is that you are being overtaken constantly by faster karts. So whilst I was trying to concentrate and trying to find the line I wanted to be on, I was always having to look over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't about to be rammed by one of the faster guys, which happened a few times on the stints, and it hurt. The problem corner for me, and you would know this if you watched the broadcast, was hairpin 1.
Your race leader there, your fastest. And there's the number 12 with a spin. It's one of the pro teams. That's WTF1.
That's Jimmy.
Yeah, it's Jimmy Broadbent.
Getting the braking sorted for that was really difficult. When I was following people and trying to understand what they were doing, it seemed as though they were using the brake to start a little bit of rotation and then try and power around on the throttle, almost like a slide, but not really. And I was trying to emulate that, but what I would usually do is hit the brake a bit too hard. And of course that starts the rotation a lot faster than you want, and it's actually very hard to come back from that once you start turning, which is why I think I spun there about 3 times during my stint. After about 10 minutes or so, I started to find a little bit of a rhythm. It was coming slowly, better than nothing, of course. And the rain had mercifully stopped, and the track was beginning, just in the first stages of starting to show a dry line. You'll probably see it appear a little bit actually on this background footage. And it was the first time that I've experienced a difference in grip between the drying line and the wet circuit. What would usually happen is I would turn in sometimes a bit too early onto the wet stuff. The kart would start to understeer. It would then hit the dry surface, and the grip, it would be like being kicked in the side as it gripped up, and then finally you can get some purchase on the tarmac and get a decent exit out of the corner. It also became a game of bravery because the last corner is this long sweeping left-hander, and the dry line, which had been the wet line but still a best grip on, you drive in like you're driving off the circuit, like you're about to go flying into the barrier, then you turn at the last second. And for someone who has spent most of the majority of the first part of his stint slipping and sliding around, having the confidence to go, yep, the kart is going to stick now, that took a while for me to obtain. The track also dried out in different areas. The top half of the circuit stayed wet a lot longer than the second half, so you'd go through the second half of the circuit, actually start getting a decent amount of speed from the kart, and then you have to slow it all back down again for the top half, where you could still very easily understeer off if you took a little bit too much speed through the first right-hander. Towards the end of my stint, the track really dried up a lot, and lap times went from being 1:15s down to 1:01s. I think the best time I did was a 1:04 or something like that before I pitted in, which at the time wasn't actually too far off the overall leaders, maybe about 2 seconds, 3 seconds a lap off, which sounds like a lot, but at that point for me was pretty decent. I was pretty much matching the karts around me in terms of pace at that point in my stint, so I was pretty happy with that, given that, again, previously absolutely zero experience in that kart or on that track. But just as I started to get the hang of how the kart was handling, it was time for me to get out, which always feels like the way with these things. You start thinking, right, I'm now finally in the rhythm, I'm finally in the groove, finally finding some time, finally finding some grip, but now I've got to get out. There was then a pretty long break between my first stint and my next stint. My next stint would be at about 3:30 in the morning, so as you can imagine, I was pretty tired by the time that rolled around, and it was time for me to get back into the kart. By this time the track had completely dried, and to give you some kind of context, the best lap time we had had out of one of our drivers up until that point was about, I think it was a 50.3, compared to the best times at the end of my stint, which were about a 58, 57 from the leaders, so 7 seconds a lap faster than the track was previously. I think it's fair to say that my second stint was a lot better than my first stint. With the track being completely dry, I kind of knew where I was going straight away. I was taking the normal racing line and not having to learn the wet line for the first part of a stint. And my word, I can tell you it was a lot more fun driving in the dry than it was in the wet. The wet was just this almost frustrating game of patience that I couldn't seem to win, and it's something that I would really like to work on if I have the opportunity in the future. But in the dry, everything was as it has ever been in a simulation. You can take the racing line, you kind of know when to brake, you kind of know when to get on the power, and as a result I was a lot quicker compared to my teammates and compared to the guys around me. And when I say quicker, I mean more on pace, not faster than. Despite all this, initially I still didn't have the confidence in the kart, and again I was having a big issue with my visor. It was steaming up so much that I had to have it cracked just to see. With it closed I saw there was nothing. In fact, there were a couple of times where I was hitting curbs over the stint. I would hit the curb and the visor would drop down, and then I wouldn't be able to see for the next half of the lap whilst I was fumbling around trying to open it again. In terms of pace of the field, I think I was somewhere around the middle, whereas before I was towards the bottom in the wet, so of course that was really quite confidence boosting for me. And I think my average lap time kind of ranged from a kind of low 53 to a mid 52, around there, which is decent. Again, I think it was probably similar-ish to the pace of Ben, with fewer spins, might I add. And I think my fastest lap was a 51.9, which was, again, about a second and a bit off our fastest lap set by our team, but I was really happy with that. However, the difference on this stint is that with about 15 minutes to go, I could really start to feel my arms struggling to hold on to the wheel, especially through T1 with it being so fast. I was having to tell myself down the straights, Jimmy, you got to relax your shoulders, because you might have seen me when I drive on stream. I carry a lot of tension in my shoulders when I drive. I'm not really sure why that is. It's just a really bad habit, I think, and I was doing the same when I was karting. So whenever I get onto the straight, I'm like, right, Jimmy, shoulders down, relax, and that kind of helped a little bit. But man, like, when I went to get out of the car when my stint finished, I was dizzy. I was struggling to walk in a straight line. My muscles were hurting, and I think I was just concentrating so hard to go fast that I don't know, my brain went into this kind of safe limp mode, and nothing really worked properly. And all I can really take away from that is that A, I'm pretty unfit, and B, karting is extremely physical, more so than even I thought, and I already knew that it was at least slightly physical. I'm sitting here right now recording this, and I still have bruises on the inside of my legs where I was being thrown around. My seat didn't fit me too well in the car, and hitting the side of it every now and then, and yeah, you're along for a ride. You are holding on for dear life, especially when the track is dry and the carts are getting that little bit quicker. And the rest after that, I guess, is history. That was my last stint in the car. I had a small nap in the weapon that is a Honda Jazz, then went back up to race control, or our race control, which was basically just the TV room with the race on, and somehow we managed to come home victors of the Clubman class, which was pretty damn special, I must say, to see your kart come across the line and knowing that you were part of a team, and knowing that, you know, you're part of the reason why that kart won the race.
Oh, amazing!
What a drift across the line. Good man.
Of course, I'm fairly confident that if we hadn't had our faster drivers, we wouldn't have won the Clubman, and of course, myself, I definitely wasn't one of the fastest guys on the team. But whilst I may have not been the fastest on track, I think myself and Alex did a lot of work behind the scenes, so I didn't feel the least bit guilty when we were given the trophy. But anyway, guys, I want to just end off this video with an apology, because I had hyped up the fact that I was going to make this big grand video for the event, and of course, it never really came to be. I'm never ever gonna be mad or angry at my cameraman for having to leave the way he did, because I would have done exactly the same thing, so it's completely fine. But at the end of the day, the video you're getting isn't the one that I wanted to present, so apologies for that, but I hope you enjoyed this one anyway. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to do all the good things, like, comment, subscribe, and I really hope that in the future I can bring you more videos on real life racing, but because that was awesome. I want to do it again, and importantly, I want to improve. I know where I was slow, I know where I had issues, I want to work on those things and really take a solid stab at trying to get good at racing in real life. And of course, I want to say a massive thank you to WTF1 for inviting myself and the guys along to race in this event. It was really good getting to meet all these people that I've only ever seen screen names of, and they're all awesome guys, so yeah, hopefully we can do it again soon. Take care, have an awesome day, see you all next time.